Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for everybody for joining in. I was asked to talk about my research team's effort regarding disturbance impacts, as was described, but also rapid assessment after storms. And today I'm going to focus mostly on hurricanes, in particular, and how we can improve our rapid assessment capabilities. I'd like to acknowledge my co-author, Bill Christie, who works with me here in Asheville. And in addition to just talking about our work, I'd like to also talk about the broader options available, stuff that's outside our daily work here. And it's to be able to answer questions like what happened after these storms, what areas were impacted, how might we prioritize it. And that is so we can better understand the implications, ultimately, of these storms. So 2020 was an extraordinary year, and if there's any year I can think of that just emphasizes how important this is, it has to be that year. 30 named hurricanes, 12 of them made landfall. This is a map from mid-October showing areas of impact. And if you were lucky enough to have had any emergency responsibility for these affected areas last year, you probably didn't get much sleep because these storms came one after another sequentially. And so as soon as that happens, it's hard to keep track of what's going on. You have cumulative impacts. It's a logistical nightmare for forest assessors and for forest planners. And my objectives are first just to talk a little bit about what rapid assessment is, and to talk about these imagery options to make sense of what happened after it passes. And then end with a brief reminder of why these types of impacts matter. So what is rapid assessment? So it's just like it sounds. It's the swift collection and evaluation of intelligence or information that you care about, that's critical for what you do next, soon after some type of incident, whether in our case it'd be a hurricane, tornado, or wildfire. And why might we rapidly assess? What are we after? Well, we want to get some time-sensitive information sometimes. As soon as we can, we might need to know where there's been impact for priority response. Sometimes we need to know over a broader area to justify financial assistance. There's all sorts of reasons why we might do this in a very quick turnaround time. But imagery is useful because it allows us to size up large areas pretty quickly in ways that we can't just do from the ground that easily. And it also, if it's done properly, it can streamline and integrate with planning and monitoring strategies more generally. So one of the most important tools we have comes from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. After these hurricanes in particular flies over some of what they view as the most affected areas based on just knowledge of where the storm went from NOAA data and where the areas of greatest concern are, which for them are the urban areas. This doesn't work so good for us that are interested in the forest interiors as well, but it's an incredibly valuable resource for understanding urban forest impacts. In addition, there are private ventures, satellite data by companies like Digital Globe and Planet.com that provide imagery, but usually you have to pay for it, although they do have an emergency response program. And so if you go to their websites, you can see what they have available and what you might want to purchase. But this imagery here from NOAA is pretty darn good for the events for which they've decided to map it. And it's not sometimes everything you want. We needed some way to map forest interior areas from all sorts of disturbances, insects and diseases, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes. And so my team helped develop this project called HIFORM, HIFORM.org. And basically it's a nice web-based way to process standard satellite imagery for mapping disturbance. And this particular map on the right is from the Springfield tornado that we'll hear about shortly. So again, all sorts of different options you can do if you have a password and have access to this through a free password through Google Earth Engine. And this is what allows us to do. This is Hurricane Michael impacts soon after they occurred across the panhandle of Florida. We know what it looks like from the ground. I mean, the stories are devastating, right? But what does it look like across such a vast landscape? We can address that with this type of mapping. And it's so scalable. So this is 10 meters, so it's 30 feet grid size across this entire landscape. And you can zoom in and see detail and pattern, but you can also efficiently zoom out. So in some ways, it's a Goldilocks resolution. It's not perfect, but it does tell us quite a bit. And usually when it comes to the urban forest, we're interested in this level of detail. This is Panama City, Florida, just west of Hurricane Michael track before the storm, and that's what it looks like after. A tremendous, truly epic loss of the urban forest canopy. And having these aerial photos, in this case, a year before and a year after, if we step back and wait for it, we can get some extraordinary views and insights that are great for communication and for understanding. But that's not always what we want, certainly not what we need in a rapid assessment sense. What we really want is something more like this, and it's a way of processing or assessing what that damage means. So this is the same change, but in this case it's showing the degree of loss of greenness using a measure of greenness called NDVI. And the larger patches to the right up here, they're industrial forest areas, and you can see in the triangle right in the center, Panama City in the mid part of this image, and then Lynn Haven up in the north. There's neighborhoods that have a lot more red and yellow than others. Blue means it's stable or increasing in greenness. Yellow means it's decreasing a little bit. Red means it's a serious loss. So right there, that tells you what's probably going on the right. That's industrial logging. Those are clear cuts sometimes of damaged areas after the hurricane, but it's also, of course, normal operations. So you have to somehow sort out which that is. But then some of these neighborhoods show these extraordinary impacts. Look in particular down here in this white box. And if we zoom in a little bit closer to that area, you can see from this image we looked at before, it's amazingly rich urban forest prior to the storm. But then after the storm, it was absolutely devastated. And so we can wait until we have that type of imagery. Sometimes we can get it from the event imagery from NOAA, but that can be a little less than ideal because there's still trees standing or damaged that are half fallen and everything. So sometimes we need to step back a little bit to make those assessments. And that need to come back over and over and over again is hard to do with that type of imagery because it's costly and it's not always available. So if we compare the satellite imagery before and after with that same approach we looked at a few slides ago, you can see the damage in this neighborhood. There are areas of concentrated red and purple, but what do those agree with? Go back, you can see there's clumps of forest and then roads and impervious areas. The areas that were damaged are the areas that have the most trees. Then with this technology, we can wait. And that was the previous one was just in the fall, immediately after the event. We can wait a little bit and see what happens, let the dust settle, if you will. And so this is summer after versus the summer before. And you can see those same areas of concentration are there, but it's not quite as extensive in some of these edge areas. Still probably devastating. Well, we know it was. We saw that aerial photo. The same technology of remote sensing, though, can let us see stuff like this. This is 2 years after. So from the summer before the storm to just this past summer. So compared to the prior one, there was a lot of damage. You can see it's a little bit less now. And the reason it's recovering. And the beauty of all this remote sensing approach is captured by this. This is just looking in the immediate post-hurricane to just a few months ago, period. And so just within that post-hurricane area now we're looking at recovery. And that's why it's in blue. That's an increase in greenness. Now the exception to that are those little scattered yellow areas and red areas. Those are areas where there's either secondary mortality, maybe a development that's reduced the forest there, or even whatever vegetation might have been there, it's being destroyed. You can go in there and look at this more closely, neighborhood by neighborhood, and resolve why that is. And the flexibility of using remote sensing, it's a seamless way to view disturbance and forest monitoring over time. Now, with all this, of course, you need to be grounded, and this is how we ground ourselves when we are trying to do these assessments over large areas. We use what's available to us on the internet. This is Google Street View, and here on this neighborhood, this is the same neighborhood, same street, same intersection, before and after Hurricane Michael. And you can see these same houses, right, on the right. It's not exactly the same position, but the house is there. This tree, though, is not, right? That tree's been completely taken out. Some of these others are ambiguous, we removed or not, but they're all damaged. As you can see down here, they've also resprouted on their bole. This pipe cleaner look is what quite often you see after an event which breaks all the branches on these trees. And it's part of the adaptive strategy of these trees that live in this environment. Now, whether or not they're damaged or not, that's a local problem that needs to be resolved tree by tree. Here's another view. Again, trees completely taken out. A lot of these that are still there, seriously damaged crowns, and quite often resprouting along the bole because their fine branches have been lost. So just as a quick little summary here is context. I talked about two things, these aerial imagery that's available quite often from NOAA, comparable imagery you can get from some of these private ventures immediately after a hurricane occurs, and then the satellite imagery, which is available, but it's much coarser. And so they have different purposes. They have different functions in an assessment. And one of the most interesting things that's arising is the increased use of drones. And I tend to put them in the same camp as some of this aerial photography, but it tends to be a little bit lower. It can go underneath the clouds and it can give you more oblique views. It's a great tool for getting insight and everything. But the problem, of course, is that it's difficult to make a map over an entire large city in a rapid time frame. It's been used well for some tornado assessments. You can actually fly down the path of a tornado for quite a few miles. But when you're trying to do it in 2 dimensions, it becomes pretty difficult. So these assessment trade-offs are something that need to be appreciated and understood. There's different capabilities. Aerial imagery from aircraft or drones is very precise. They need someone to review or process it to make sense of it. That can be very costly. It is a wonderful photo documentation, however, for monitoring purposes. Meanwhile, the satellite maps are coarse, but very efficient and scalable both in space and time, and well integrated with long-term monitoring. So just to illustrate these a little bit, this is Hurricane Sally from 2020, a beautiful urban canopy here, absolutely beautiful canopy. And this is the NOAA imagery immediately after that event. And you can see down trees, you can see standing water, you can see it just looks ragged. It looks, you know, like your hair does after you wake up after a night of being tossed about. And it's quite a bit harder to say what that canopy disturbance means. It's jostled, it's irregular in the time immediately after it. So even though you have this fine, precise imagery, it's still not enough to completely understand what the impacts are. But target impacts, maybe trees over roads, trees and damaged houses, that's quite often what it's flown for, understand the structures and the damage to that. It can be pretty effective. Here's imagery from that same 10-meter remote sensing effort. And you can see there's areas where there's lost trees and areas where it's not. And so again, very imprecise, but nonetheless, for some purposes, very useful. So what does this mean in context? So this is cooling degree days. That's what the power company uses to understand how much energy they need for air conditioning. And if we look at the last 40 years, and we rank them in terms of the amount of daily heat accumulated with this cooling degree day measure. You can see that 2020 was the hottest in Panama City that we've had. 2019 was the third hottest, both of those post-hurricane. And this has been going on for several years, going back before that. So the question is, what happens when we don't have the urban canopy to keep this neighborhood cool as it's getting warmer? So mapping technology and data are rapidly evolving. There's still a need for some work. We have a lot available, and they all have strengths and trade-offs. These include near real-time assessment needs as well as long-term tools that integrate very well with monitoring. So I'll leave you with these links. These are links that I've used and use all the time to assess hurricanes when they happen from my desktop, and I thank you for your time.